So I was trying to catch up on Fire Force the other day, and it's it's not good. Now I kind of knew that was coming because I had already dropped the manga, and I was just hoping that the anime production would be able to refine the manga storyline and bring some more energy to it. But even that aspect of this anime has a ton of issues. One of the most prominent being that the editing can get really bad. Now, some of you might be wondering, Ember, what do you mean by editing? Which is an excellent question. Bad editing is not something that comes up very often unless a project is really in the shitter. When talking about the mediums of film and television, editing refers to how different chunks of film or animation are put together in a sequence, how one shot changes to another shot, and how long a shot lasts before the next shot appears. And that's why it's kinda hard to talk about editing. It's not something that you can take a still image of and say, this looks bad. It's something you have to feel as a temporal and spatial concept, so it's kinda hard to identify it on its own. Obviously there are some guidelines that help in that process, but it's mostly up to the taste of whoever's putting all the created footage together. This is one of the reasons why people are very quick to point out that Fire Force was directed by Yuki Yase, an ex-Studio Shaft director. Shaft anime often have a very potent and non-traditional directing style, with their off-kilter editing and shot composition being part of that style. But very rarely do these shows have what I would call bad editing. In fact, one of my favorite shows from 2017 was the Zaragoto series, which was also directed by Yase under Akiyuki Shinbo's supervision. And the omnipresent style he uses is something I love about it. It's not just Shaft director working on battle shonen doesn't work, because A, Shaft directors such as Shinbo have already worked extensively on battle shonen before and it turned out fantastic, and B, the scenes that look the worst in Fire Force are usually the ones where it's just a group of characters talking in a room. So we need to actually look at the specific instances of bad editing. Going back to that line about temporal and spatial concepts, one of the more obvious signs of bad editing can be found in spatial inconsistencies. For example, we have this part at the train station where Captain Obi pushes Shinra out of the way. First, we have the shot of the Company 8 characters approaching, then a shot of just Shinra's legs moving around, and then we see Obi pushing Shinra back. And when it's all played together, it feels a bit disorienting. What causes the confusion here is that we don't see Obi in the shot of Shinra's legs before we cut to him standing right next to Shinra, and it feels like we suddenly jumped a couple seconds into the future. It's not much, but it is jarring because it forces the audience to reorient themselves afterwards. Breaking the flow of time should only be done deliberately and with purpose because otherwise it unnecessarily messes with the viewer's head. If they had continued that second shot so that we also saw Obi's legs, then it would have felt a bit more cohesive. This type of blatant mistake isn't as common in Fire Force as other editing mishaps, but they're still present enough to be noticed. But what does it feel like when there isn't an actual mistake and the transition just feels kinda off? Well, it looks something like this. This is the shot that really clued me into the idea that Fire Force has a significant editing problem. The cut from Obi's legs landing on the floor to him cracking his neck is incredibly jarring because it breaks the flow of action in this scene. In the first shot, Obi's body is moving downward at a relatively quick pace, with the camera moving down with him. And then before the motion is complete, we cut to a shot of him cracking his neck with the camera holding still. Additionally, these two shots are filmed from entirely different angles, so along with the abrupt halt of motion, the jump in position amplifies how off this sequence feels. Now, it is entirely possible that this is purposefully jarring, but if it is, then I must ask to what point and purpose. There's nothing in the dialogue or tone of this scene, or any of the scenes I'll be discussing for that matter, that would suggest a jarring cut would fit with the mood. So it's much more likely that this effect was not intentional. So how would you correct this kind of edit while keeping the same actions in play? Well, the first answer that jumped out at me was a threefold conclusion. First, make sure that the motion is completed before cutting to the next shot. Not completing a motion before cutting usually only works if the next shot is also moving, preferably in the same direction. Second, make sure that Obi is also in a standing position before cutting, so it doesn't feel like we're losing a second or two in between shots. We don't have to see his whole body profile, but knowing that his legs are straightened out is enough to tell us that he is standing upright. Finally, film the shot of Obi cracking his neck from relatively the same angle as the shot of his feet hitting the ground, so that the viewer isn't suddenly forced to readjust how they're mentally viewing the subject in the scene. Obviously, there are plenty of other ways you could also fix this, but this is probably the way I would cut it. Aside from the technical aspects, editing also serves a more artistic purpose. Every Frame a Painting explored this concept more in depth in his own video, but in terms of crafting an emotional cinematic experience, editing is one of the director's primary tools for accomplishing this. Take the scene where Company 8 is on its way to extinguish an infernal. Obi notices that Shinra's a bit nervous since this is his first time on the job, and so he gives Shinra a pat on the head and some encouraging words to make sure he's in the right headspace. A neat idea in theory, but in practice, this scene only has 3 shots inside the fire truck, and so it doesn't leave as much of an impact as it could. It feels more like it was shot for efficiency rather than to elicit some kind of emotion. If the main character is nervous, that can sometimes be a cue for the audience to also be nervous, so we need to feel something just like Shinra does. To fix this moment, we'd start with the same overhead shot looking down at everyone, but then instead of immediately cutting to Obi comforting Shinra, we cut to a close-up or extreme close-up of just Shinra looking nervous, possibly from a lower position and at a slightly upward angle, so we can actually see that he is nervous. Then we cut to a shot of the top of Shinra's head as Obi places his hand on it, followed up by a shot of Shinra reacting to this. Then we can cut to the shot of Obi and Shinra together as he gives his encouraging words, before cutting to the last interior shot of Shinra still looking a bit nervous, but also slightly more confident. There's a lot to unpack in the corrections I just made, but I'm going to boil it down to 2 concepts. The first is that emotions take time. If you rush through a scene as quickly as possible just so that you can have that scene before getting to the next scene, then it's kinda pointless. If you want to convey an emotion, then you need to take enough time to let that emotion fully sink in with the audience. The second is that editing is such a broad term that it often ends up bleeding into just general cinematography. Even though I didn't change any of the dialogue in this scene, and only added 1 minor character movement, I ended up inserting 3 different shots that weren't present in the original. My point is that this is an incredibly complex process with not one single answer to fix everything. I should also point out that not all of Fire Force's editing is bad. Some of the cuts, especially in action scenes, are some of the most gratifying in the entire series because they both maintain the flow of a given scene, as well as use unconventional shot composition to convey that flow, along with the required emotions. Fire Force has some great editing, but it also has just as much, if not more, bad editing. There's an old saying about editing that if it's good, you don't notice it, and for the most part, I'd wholeheartedly agree. If you're consistently noticing faults in the editing, then it's going to continuously drag you out of the experience, and this is a continuous problem. Sometimes there's a legitimate excuse for why it's like this, but most of the time there isn't. I could probably go for another 20 minutes just covering stuff in the first 2 episodes, let alone later episodes, but that would be extremely repetitive and hopefully you've gotten the point already. I will leave a list of timestamps and specific problems for the first 2 episodes on screen right now though, if you want to see what I'm talking about. I might not be an expert, but I know what's good and I know what I like, and I can at least point out something that was clearly rushed when it got to a particular part of the filmmaking process. And it's unfortunate that it happened to be one of the most important parts of said process. Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourke Tanjoin, Christine Seibert, Call Me Catlord, Ryan Johnson, Jennifer Spencer, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.